Hello everyone again and a very happy new year to everyone. I'm Surya Gulagani, Director Marketing here at Datagaps, and thank you for joining us today. Before we get started, we have a couple of quick housekeeping comments. First, we have muted all mics to avoid any unintended distractions. Next, the chat room is open so that you can interact with us through the chat. And finally, at the end of the session, we will open it up for Q&A. Today, in this webinar, we will discuss the best practices of Power BI testing automation using Datagaps DataOps Suite. On the panel today, we have David Small, VP of Sales and Marketing at Datagaps, and Mr. Shubhanshu Dikshit, Product Manager at Datagaps. On the agenda today, Dave will give us a quick introduction about Datagaps and DataOps Suite. Next, we'll talk about some essentials of testing automation in the Power BI space. And then we talk about some use cases that DataOps Suite can really help with all those best practices in place. Now I hand this over to Dave. Dave, stage is all yours.
All right. Thank you, Surya. And thank you, everybody, for attending. We have a lot of things to cover today. Maybe a little bit of fun with ChatGPT, but also really focused in on automated or the best practices for testing Power BI. Again, I'm Dave Small, Vice President. Shubhanshu will be doing the demo, and we greatly appreciate your interest. First thing we want to do is really just sort of set the stage about what Datagaps is all about. You know, we were founded on the premise that companies face a huge challenge moving data through the enterprise to bring it in, to ingest it, run it through their processes, to get it ready for analytics. And we really believe that it's end-to-end testing of that journey is fundamental in making decisions based upon trusted data. You know, so that's what we're focused on, is making sure that you can make appropriate decisions and that you can trust the data. The number one reason that data analytics fail, it's either number one, number two, is the fact that people don't trust the data, so they won't come back to your analytics platform. We've developed a suite of technologies called DataOps Suite. Those technologies are web-based interfaces, Apache Spark-based, and those technologies are deployed in your environment, either on-prem or behind your firewalls, and we have no access to the technology or the data itself for security reasons. The DataOps Suite has a number of products. ETL Validator, which takes care of a certain amount of the needs in the end-to-end testing. BI Validator, we'll be talking about today, and specifically about Power BI. There's the capability to do data quality monitoring of data coming into the enterprise, or as it rests in your enterprise. And then we also, out of the DataOps Suite, provide the ability to create test data. So if you need to potentially stress your ETL process or stress your Power BI process, you can use test data management to create volumes to do that kind of stress. So in today's complex environments, you know, the challenge is really quite large for organizations to be able to get all of the data sources that you need to do data analytics and reporting and so on. So all those data sources, to get those into the enterprise, and then all the end data use cases of analytics, machine learning, business intelligence, and so on. How do you feed that data and validate the fact that the end use cases are going to be making decisions or working with properly formed and trusted data? So that's what Datagaps is all about, is getting the data, making sure it's properly formed, and testing the fact that it's properly formed, and then also testing your analytics platform. So as data comes in, it's ingested into the enterprise. You can do things like profiling. You can do things like data quality test, observability, wide variety of things to make sure that the data coming in is properly formed. You move it to a collection point where you ultimately run it through your transformation processes, enrichment processes. We provide a mechanism to validate that those things are working properly by independently testing those processes. You move that into a data storage area, whether it's a data warehouse, data lake, wide variety of things today. And then you query and do visualizations against that. So with DataOps Suite, ETL Validator takes care of the majority of the left-hand side of this diagram. And then BI Validator takes care of the remaining mile. So it's what helps you with regression testing, performance testing, a wide variety of tests to ensure that that end-to-end journey is producing the appropriate results. So some of the challenges, and the challenges are quite hard to recognize, but quite hard to solve. So some of the BI challenges have to do with the sheer number of data sources that come into the enterprise and the sheer number of requests that an organization will get for data analytics. There's a tremendous amount of technology choices as well. You know, AWS cloud, Azure cloud, should I use a certain ETL process? Should I be using Snowflake? You know, there's all kinds of technology choices that you have out there. Some fit together well, some not so well. And those are costly mistakes if you make some mistakes in choosing the wrong technology. Along with choosing those technologies, there's a need for a talent pool for some of the advanced technologies. So, you know, that's another challenge organization has is as I build out my technology stack, how do I build out my talent pool? And then you throw on top of all that data privacy, security, governance, and it's a big challenge. If you take that down to just the data analytics side of things, the challenge is in the case for Power BI testing is if you have 50 dashboards in your organization, which probably is a very small number, the best practice says that you should use 8 visuals, no more than 8 visuals per dashboard. And if there are 20 data elements that make up that visual, you have 5 to 10 filters and sliders on a dashboard. And let's say there's 100,000 records, and which again is quite light. Then that means that you have the opportunity of having 800 million opportunities for mistakes. And so what Datagaps and DataOps is about is to minimize that through testing. And we thought we'd have a little bit of fun with ChatGPT. I know all of you have probably piddled around with ChatGPT. It's quite a remarkable piece of technology. It's this all-encompassing, knowledgeable thing. And what we asked was, what are the best practices in Power BI testing? So we asked that of ChatGPT, and it came back with 14 different best practices for testing Power BI. And so what we did was we sort of aligned our technology stack with what ChatGPT said were the best practices. And if you look at this, out of the 14 best practices, we didn't play in 3 of the areas. Requirement analysis, you know, clearly understand the business requirements. You know, that's sort of a manual effort, something you do outside of testing, but it does form the basis of designing the effective test cases. You look at cross-browser and cross-device testing, we don't play in that particular area. And then user acceptance testing, you know, that's sort of a manual effort for the most part, but everything else that ChatGPT suggested, we play in. So the data source validation, so verifying that the data source used in Power BI reports are accurate, up to date, aligned with the business. That's all handled for the most part by the ETL validation. The data transformation and cleaning, for the most part, that's handled by ETL Validator. Column measures and validations happens to be handled by a combination of ETL Validator and BI Validator. Parameterized testing, you know, you can create one test, and from that test, parameterize the filters and the inputs, and then run that test many times without having to create a test for each permutation of the filters and such. Security access and control, data refresh, integration testing. So being able to test the BI Validator from your DevOps environment and use GitHub and Jenkins and a variety of other tools to be able to drive and use that as part of the testing process. So again, DataOps Suite handled 11 of 14 best practices suggested by ChatGPT. So again, this was sort of just a fun thing for us to do to see what ChatGPT said, but it really aligns a lot with what we've been working on. So we thought that was pretty clever that it's working in that particular fashion. So down to a more granular level, what could possibly go wrong? Right. So here's a standard Power BI dashboard. It's got a number of graphs. It's got metrics in there. It's got sliders. It's got filters. And the issue is that this graph could be produced and rendered by a variety of different data sources, and different combinations of things can be selected. So what could possibly go wrong? Well, the answer is there are a number of things that can go wrong. A lot of it has to do with the sheer number of dashboards that are requested by IT or the business users, the number of data elements, the number of reports that need to be verified. We have companies that as they upgrade the application or the underlying software, Power BI or Tableau in some cases, they want to do regression testing because they know that those upgrades are introducing problems. And sometimes that testing takes months to do that, depending upon the size of your implementation. So that introduces a lot of problems at times. You change metadata, and you make a minor little change in the metadata, and it runs all the way through your ETL processes and ultimately hits your data analytics platform, and it causes your data analytics platform to do a calculation differently than it did before. Certainly filters, the security models, problems with data ingestion and the ETL processes, and then just simple user error. All these things can result in increased cost of ownership, inaccurate insights, and the loss of trust in your data analytics platform. So we help with a lot of different types of tests. We'll be going through a couple of those. Shubhanshu will be showing those today. We have a large number of success stories. One probably most prevalent for today's audience is a large SI, where they had the challenge of how do I validate my development environment, and how do I monitor the movement of things that are complete in my development environment to my production environment to make sure that there weren't anomalies and that things were moved appropriately and completely. So the objective was to do upgrade testing. They wanted to do performance testing and also regression testing. The results were that they reduced significantly the number of issues that were ultimately found and moved into the production implementations. It helped streamline the development process, and it helped reduce testing from months to days. So a very nice success story in one of our customers. The key benefits to our technology, again, 100% test validation. So we can test all the records coming in. We can test as many of your data analytics visuals and dashboards as you want, up to 100%. It's the repeatability. So once you create test cases, you can actually parameterize those and repeat those multiple times and get different results. Cost reduction in the automation of test cases over manual testing, and then reduce time to market. So with that, I'd like to turn this over to Shubhanshu to talk about the examples that we're going to go through in the demonstration today.
Thanks a lot. Yeah, thanks a lot. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
All right. So the very first aspect that we want to cover is, of course, the different practices that we're going to cover in this deck. Now, we're going to cover functional testing, security testing, regression, migration, and of course, monitoring the quality of your reports and data in production. Now, in this particular section of the demo, we want to get into a bit more details and understand how exactly the product differs, or in this case, the test case differ from one another. Before I actually start showcasing the live demo, I want to go through a few of these use cases and just talk about them. The first one is functional testing. The first aspect with regards to functional testing is to ensure that whatever numbers, KPIs, or measures that you see within your Power BI reports are accurate and trusted upon. Now that brings in a very important question. Well, how do you validate these particular numbers? Well, one answer could be, hey, you can validate these numbers based on the numbers that you've seen previously. Patterns and other aspects exist, so you can maybe use the previous set of numbers that you got from your previous reports and your past reports as a whole to maybe define some algorithm to say what a correct range of the report is. So that's one way you can do it, and the application has that support inherently in observability. Another way is to define rules on ranges. Well, while you might define profiling as a whole, you can also define a certain range that my number needs to be between this and this range, so on and so forth. But of course, the most concrete way to define a very interesting or very essential KPI would be to validate it against the data itself. A clear benefit of argument here is that this particular number that I have on my Power BI report is valid because I have cross-referenced it against an Excel file. So, I mean, that's something a lot of folks who come to us do quite often, where the requirement from their side is that, hey, currently we use Excel or currently we use SQL to manually run these queries and validate these numbers one against the other. And so validating these is pretty important, and that's true. And we do that, but we go one step further on that itself, and I will showcase the same in our live demo. The main gist there is that when you're validating a report from your side, especially if you are doing it manually, you're logging in using your credentials. So in this case, if you are looking at a global report, you might have restricted access to that global report. And so when you're creating those aggregates, where aggregates might not match, and even if they do match with the corresponding data set that you're working with, it need not mean that the data sets and reports other people see, people across in your entire organization see, might match. This has a lot of other use cases and benefits that I'll discuss soon in the demo. The other aspect is, of course, with regards to validation of our filters, of our slicers, and other aspects. This is something that we've noticed comes quite often as well. People want to ensure that the number of slicers that they see in that particular report is valid. They want to ensure that the name of the slicers is also valid. Duplicacy checks, null checks, range checks, everything happens with regards to the slicers, filters, and other metadata components as well. And this is quite straightforward. You need to ensure that your reports are being consistent and are being correct in terms of the non-data aspect as well. That's functional testing. I should not, basically, I don't have to actually go into detail on why security testing is pretty important. Our BI reports are locked with RLS by default for a reason. It implies that the business intelligence that we're working with is sensitive by default. And for this reason, RLS is enabled in the product as well. And what this implies is that if you want to ensure that a particular user group or a basically object set does not have access to a particular set of records or a particular data set in your Power BI system, we can track that. And as best practice should be, you should keep tracking that as well. It's something that can be run. It's a very simple rule that can be created and then should be run at least once a week or at a daily cadence if it's better. The main reason for this is to ensure that the RLS security is being enforced correctly, because RLS is never going to fail. What's going to fail is the configuration. A new user coming in, someone changing the settings of a particular file in the backend, or someone gaining temporary admin access to do something temporary and then messing up the entire security layer system. Of course, very unheard of, but we have seen cases of these. But most importantly, keeping a validation checkpoint is very critical and helps a lot of our clients bar themselves from any kind of compliance issues. The other use case is with regards to regression. And this is something that we have faced quite often, even in our own careers, where we have a particular transformation that another team member has done. And your report is fine and everything is great. But then someone goes in and changes something in their own code. And as anyone who has had enough experience in pipelines and ETL pipelines know that a change that might not affect your report still somehow does. And so what you want to ensure is that any kind of deployment or upgrades do not break your reports. Upgrades are particularly notorious for this, as you might imagine, something that changes with regards to not just Power BI upgrades, but also upgrades in example functions. You might be using an open source tool that has a particular output for a function, which gives integer output. Suddenly this has been converted into float because the latest versions demand that and it's more accurate. And now, while you upgrade your system and the function still works, you will notice that your reports might not be as accurate or might be too accurate, might have a lot more decimal points or might be running out of the text field that you've given it. It's 7-8 decimal points at this point, and it's really messing up your report. Something as simple as that, or something as groundbreaking as the function themselves being changed. So regression is pretty important to ensure that throughout upgrade and deployments, the reports that should not change do not change. Then we have migration testing. Now, this is pretty specific to migration use cases. This could be with regards to making sure that your pre-prod environment and your production environment are in sync. These are two distinct environments, and you would like to ensure that these are in sync. The case that we are showcasing, of course, in this case would be on-prem versus cloud. It's a noted thing that we have been seeing in the past 5-6 years, at least, that a lot of businesses start up with an on-prem system, and as they find some stability and they understand the business and the data sets better, they move to a cloud-based architecture to better use the latest technologies that we have. And so by shifting their on-prem system from data ETL pipelines, they also shift their BI pipelines there as well. And so making sure that in this migration process, which usually takes about 1-2 years for a big end project, you still ensure that the reports are valid through and through. Finally, of course, the main aspect is with regards to production report monitoring. This is harkening back to our functional testing, where, hey, if you want to make sure that your reports are being validated, a good thing to do is just keep an eye on them day in, day out. Take a note of all the different aspects that you see in your report. What is the volume? What are the measures? How often do you see nulls within your system? On how often do you see other aspects within your system? Hey, is this a pattern that you'd see within your reports, and so on and so forth. So these are the few sets of specific validations that we're going to go through. I have examples for all of them, but I'm going to start with a very basic example, which is our migration testing or upgrade testing. So I'm going to start sharing my screen at this point. Right. Dave, can you confirm if you can see my screen?
Yes, Shubhanshu, we can.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Yeah. So the exact example that we want to cover is a migration testing. Now, this could be between layers, or this could be between a migration project itself. The main use case here is that I have two sets of Power BI reports, and these are in two distinct locations, and I want to ensure that these are being validated one against the other. So here I pull in my Power BI upgrade node. And in this case, I select my data source. As you can see, I have multiple connections within my system. For the sake of example, I'll choose the same connection. I can, of course, choose to allow more same filters for the application. And of course, since the application has open-ended customizable test cases, more on that later, you can actually define a test case to run at particular conditions. Now, let me just change the opacity to 0.2, and we'll see what that means. Now, I'll go into this towards the end of the report. First, I would like to showcase the exact use cases and then jump to the sources and how we create them in the connection. But the basic gist is that since the application can impersonate your specific account users and admin for that matter, we have access to all those workspaces as well. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead with a curated example where I have a sample store dev simple. This is my report that I've picked up. And the story is that this is my development report or my QA report. Very simple. This is exactly something that we see in Power BI. I capture a bookmark. This is to ensure that if there are any filters, those are captured. And then I do the same for report B. Of course, in this case, I pick up the production level report. Now, my main goal here is to ensure that in this case, both the environments should be in sync. So as I see, the reports more or less look the same. And in fact, if you have a quick glance, you'll see the numbers are also matching quite properly. But now I'll run the application live. And in this case, in the backend, the application has the connections already defined. It's going to go in the backend. It's going to authenticate the report. It's going to pull the PDF version of the report out. And then it's going to run two types of validations. It's going to run a textual-based validation. This is where we are going to compare the text of the report against the text of the second report. And it's also going to compare a visual validation, where we are going to measure the visuals, the color densities, the font types, alignments, and a lot more, everything from a pixel to pixel perspective. And then we are going to compare these two and leave them for the end user. So in this case, we see that, yes, in this case, report A and report B both have been downloaded. And here we see that, hey, the status has failed. And it has failed for a very obvious reason. Well, I've gone in and made the name incorrect. So that's why we see that, okay, this is a name incorrect. But that's not it. We see there are a few numbers being mismatched as well. 3.1 million versus 3.3 million. And of course, if there's something different, the distribution has also changed. So we see 32.45% versus 31.98%. And in this case, you'll see that, okay, there's a bit of mismatch here, and there might be an extra column being added. But if I switch over to pixel comparison, you'll see that the application now has a lot bigger marks. And here, if I drag to sum of sales by ship mode, this particular title has been shifted in its alignment. So that's an easy example that I can showcase. The application can be used for much further and detailed analysis as well to ensure that the compatibility and the standardization of your report is being followed through one after the other. And that's one of the key use cases. Of course, since the tool is pretty open-ended and comprehensive, one test case can solve multiple use cases. Here, the business story is that we are validating a report A and report B1 dev against a production environment. And in the other case, it could also be that you're just trying to make sure that during an on-prem to cloud migration, you're making sure your reports are being validated. Few pointers on the specific use case. The first aspect is that in the upcoming release, we are going to ensure that the end user can define a complete validation based on region as well. So you can define to a good degree of how much threshold you're expecting and as well as sub-regions. So that's coming up front. And of course, in the upcoming versions, you can also drag and drop the entire report. So here you see I've drag and drop a single page here to just select the exact report I'm working with. But in the upcoming release, which is, I guess, in this month end itself, we should be able to drag and drop the entire workspace itself. And that's something we have in our previous version of this product. So it's not that we don't have the functionality. We have it. We're just going to put it in our thin client version, which is the version we see. So that's upgrade test plan. Now, I do see there are a few questions, but the way we want to push forward in this case is that we would like to wrap up a few set of test cases, and then we'll have all the questions answered together in the last 15 minutes. So that's the live use case that I want to illustrate. The next use case that I want to switch over to is a regression test case. So here you see I have a lot of data flows and test cases which vary through the entire comprehensive ETL validation system. But using the folder structure, I'm going to stick just to Power BI. Just a side note on why you see a particular star behind the prefix of each and every test case. That's because these test cases have not been pushed to the main branch. Since the application has Git connectivity built into the product, and I can define them to use hotfixes and other aspects. Currently, these are the test cases that have not been pushed, and that's why those are coming out at star. But enough of that. Let's move on to our regression test use case. So our upgrade test plan was quite straightforward from the business perspective. The regression has a similar story, similar to what we saw earlier. In this particular system, we want to ensure that a particular report does not alter, does not change in a particular way, does not break. So here we have Power BI report, and here we select just a single system. Once again, comparison options allow you a bit more degree of control on how the results look. And here, instead of selecting two distinct reports, we're going to select the same report. So now my question lies, hey, between two reports, I can define one of them as source of truth. What is my source of truth when I'm comparing the same report? Well, the benchmark that you define yourself. So the business story here is that on Monday, I come in, I understand that there's going to be a lot of changes in my Power BI system, and there's going to be a few changes to the transformation logic as well. I need to ensure that my particular set of reports are not going to change after these transformations and upgrades. So Monday morning, I come in, I define my benchmark, and this is the source of truth that is captured by the product. In this case, I define that this is the source of truth. I can also define the set of filters, slicers, and other aspects present as well. We're starting simple, and then we'll reach that complexity. And then in the results, when I run this application again and again, it's going to validate the benchmark report against the run report. It also keeps track of the loading time. So if, say, someone has gone in and added a lot of extra load times, you can actually capture that within the application as well. And so in this case, we see, hey, everything is fine. But if there was a difference coming into the system, you will see a similar error that we saw earlier. So this is upgrade and regression test plan. Basically, what we're trying to do is a bit of a regression and a bit of migration. But one key factor that everyone must have noticed so far is that we are sticking to this from a visual perspective. Like, sure, we are capturing the visuals from pixel to pixel perspective, but hey, we want to get in deeper. We want to ensure that the data is valid. Because yeah, sure, these reports might change, but hey, what you want to ensure is the 3.1 million, this is valid. And so in this point, we switch over to our visual comparison based on data. So I have a very good story here that I can actually use to deploy this. And let me just pull my ADLS a little out of the picture here so I can showcase what I'm trying to illustrate. Yeah, there we go. Much more easily palpable. So the story here goes that, hey, my client had this particular system where they had an ADLS system, an Azure Data Lake system, where they had files which were eventually pushed into Snowflake after a bunch of transformations. And after those transformations, they are going to be pushed into Power BI. So of course, since we are an ETL validation tool, we can do the validation between ADLS and Snowflake as well. But then we also want to ensure that the Power BI report, the measure, the numbers created in the Power BI report, those are valid. So quick look here will just showcase that, yes, you can actually compare the systems within ADLS and Snowflake. And I want to take this opportunity to talk a bit more about data compare, because this is one of the best use cases of the application that we have, because this node takes care of mapping, this node takes care of data type mismatches, and this node is easily scalable. So even if you're working with billions of records, the application handles everything automatically. So you, in this case, will never have to worry about the data type mismatches between the Power BI report that you see and your own SQL Server or Snowflake or file output, Excel output that you will come. The application will take care of all of that. You define it once, the application will take care of it. And every morning, if you want to, you can run this validation to ensure that your reports are valid. So in this case, of course, the first use case for the story was, hey, I want to make sure that my ADLS file and my Snowflake file are valid. And so application takes care of the mapping, as you see right there, multiple columns. And in the results, it says that, okay, there's a few mismatches. There are a few records present only in ADLS that have not been transferred to Snowflake. And as you see, there are a few mismatches that we see, mainly in email address and geography key column. Again, this is very data-centric. Let's move on to the Power BI aspect here. For that, let me go to a use case that is much more easier to work with. Yeah, there we go. So here we have the same question that, hey, now that we have defined our data mart or our specific layer, I want to ensure that within this report, let's go to the specific report itself, that we have multiple visuals and measures. How do we know these numbers are valid? So the first question is, hey, these numbers, how are they being generated? How am I seeing them within the data gaps? So there are two key pointers here. The first one is, of course, that the application is using Power BI's engine itself. So a quick disclaimer and a quick sidetrack on how the Power BI node works. So when you define a particular report in Power BI and you change visuals and you change filters, you see these visuals change dynamically. So now I've changed the filters and the visuals are changing dynamically. The numbers are changing them as well. This is because Power BI engine runs in the background. Basically takes into account the access that you have, the number of filters that I've defined, the slices that you have defined, and then creates the data set output from there. We in Datagaps, we just plug into that specific data set itself. So here you see 266 million. I hope you can see it's a little zoomed in, but this is 266 million, which is sum of the yearly income. And in the visual element, you see it's not just that, we have the data set of each and every visual that you see, especially the KPIs as well. So here we see it's not 266, it's actually 2659 that's being rounded up by Power BI. We are tapping into the Power BI engine and picking that data set. So this data set is the one that all reports are going to be built upon. So if there's someone going in and changing the filters, say female right here, we see 132 million come up. If I go into visuals, the data set alters as well as 1315. So this is one key point that I want to clarify. And this is going to be very helpful for us when we want to validate our reports at a granular level. So I'll come to that towards the end of this example. So in this case, of course, we just want to ensure that this set of values that I see as bar graph is valid. I'm using bar graph because that's the most simple use case for us. You can, of course, use something more complex as well as a map data and other aspects. The application works the same because at the end of the day, it's just a data for us. And now that we've pulled this particular data set out, as you see in the results, this is a data set for us. The application handles the rest. In parallel, I pick up a DIM customer. This is my table, and I pick it up from my SQL Server. Now, again, this could be any typical JDBC connection. This could be a flat file, Excel, anything that you can define as the source, the proof here. And then, of course, I could have done the aggregation within the JDBC connection itself, but I wanted to illustrate that the application is pretty open-ended. So here I picked up one JDBC connection and I combined it to a SQL node. Well, that's not it. You can pick up anything within your system. This could be API connections. This could be flat files. This could be other Power BI tables or other Tableau tables as well that you can pull into your system as a data set. Then apply some SQL, maybe apply some Python. If you want to apply some Scala or Java code as well on top of it, everything is useful by the application. And then run any kind of validation that you want to do. Here we want to primarily focus on data compare and data rules and profiling, but any other validation is also fair game. And of course, since we have an ETL validation background, we can save the results and of course do an entire ETL validation system as well if you would like to. But here, of course, we would like to save the results as a file or maybe as a table or view in our DB. So pretty open-ended, and there's no limitation on what the end user can and cannot do. So the next use case is, of course, with, what do we do in this case? Well, in this case, we do an aggregate. Now, this example is fairly simple. Of course, we don't see that there's going to be a lot of folks which have just one table as their own report. They're going to have 20 tables, and the measure is going to be a combination of those 20 tables. And we understand that, hey, this is going to be a complicated system. So the application does provide a query builder right out of the gate that you can define. And here, of course, the way the query builder works is that it takes into account the joining keys between tables and other aspects as well. And then you can create your own specific measure or calculation here. So here you see that we have multiple tables and entities that I can work with. And here I have just defined the function that I want to define. I can add a lot of more where conditions and other aspects as well. It's particularly helpful if you have a JDBC connection defined. In that case, you can just choose the exact columns you want to work with and then choose the aggregates you want to work with as well. It's very good for simple to mid complexity queries. Of course, for more advanced queries, you will need some human intervention, or maybe not. In that case, we do have OpenAI assistants. So what Dave was saying with regards to ChatGPT, we do embrace AI within our system. And so this is a co-pilot assistance where we give the option to the end user to enable to send context. Now, again, this is completely optional. We understand there's a lot of compliance aspects with this. So we never send data out, but we let the user send the metadata. So here it implies if I'm going to work with DIM customer and I want to ensure that the queries that are generated by our generative AI is accurate. So I just ensure that I send all this context as well. So context here is the column name and most importantly, the data type. And so when I send this particular information, the queries generated by our AI assistants are much more accurate. So in this case, you can just ensure that, hey, these are the 4 tables I'm working with, and this is the particular measure. It's a statistical p-test. Please write the code, either SQL or Python code, using these table names and these other column names and these other data types. Please make the corresponding code. And because the application has a lot more context, the code is much more accurate and can actually get where you want to get. So that's one of the key pointers when you're trying to validate a report against data, that, hey, this measure has been generated after an entire pipeline. How can I recreate it with just Excel? Well, a lot of us do. But in some cases, if you want to define it properly, you can use this particular use case as well. Now, the results are aggregates from our JDBC connection. And in the other case, we have our aggregates from our report. A simple data compare is what comes into picture. I define my data sets. The application is going to take care of mapping. The application is going to take care of red conversions. And of course, since we're working with a realistic data set here, it's very likely that you might have to define a bit of threshold, because you get data every hour or you get data every 12 hours. Your reports are built every 6 days or every 2 days. So there's bound to be a 5% or 0.5% threshold depending on the use case. And you can define that here as well. So as to ensure there are no false flags. And in the results, we see, hey, there's a bit of match and there's a bit of mismatch. The match records are, well, most of them do match. But for total children too, there's a bit of mismatch that we see within our results. So from this point on, there are multiple things that we can do. Well, now that you've found something incorrect, and this goes back to the other use cases as well. Now that you've found something incorrect, what's next? Well, there are multiple things you can do. Maybe you want to raise a Jira ticket that, hey, if something fails within my report in the morning, I want a Jira ticket raised immediately. Or maybe you're the type of person who wants to see a Teams notification pop up anytime this validation fails, because, hey, this is running in production. This is key, paramount, that you get the notification as soon as it fails. And of course, we do have email notifications with reporting as well. But if you have any other ticketing service, any other notification system, any other system you want to connect to, we do have a great amount of integration by default. But plugins is what enables us to define any type of integration that you would like to. Since we do support Python code, so our main principle is that, hey, why don't we let the end user define their own plugins if they want to? We'll give them a lot of plugins ourselves, but hey, if you want to define something yourself, you can do it as well. So here, something as simple as Jira ticket creation. For the end user, all they have to do is define parameters, and that's it. The code is taken care of in the backend by a developer. I'll showcase that shortly. But just to illustrate the point of how easy it is to define this, here we are going to send a Teams notification, and all it needs is a webhook URL. In the backend, it's just running Python from a single defined repository. So your developer goes into the plugin system, and as you see, you get to define your parameters, you get to define your code, you get to define your data sets and your output. Everything has been enabled, it's developer friendly. So at the end of the day, you can define any kind of integration you would like to. So that's the first aspect, which regards to this entire system. The second aspect that I want to talk about now is, at the start I discussed that how a particular report might look different to you and to your team members based on the access that they have. Well, the same is true based on the filters that they choose as well. There's no guarantee that your end report is going to be viewed with just the default filters that you've defined. Of course, the people who are going to look at it are going to mess with it a lot, and they want to ensure that filters are going to be defined. Now, in this case, we have just a single filter, but I'm sure you don't have to look far to have reports with 10, 20 filters and sliders and slicers and other aspects. And here comes a key factor when we're working with aggregated data. Here, if I was choosing, if I'm working with the data set for male gender, M gender as M here, and if there was a problem, say with this particular data set, When I'm aggregating both the data sets, female and male, the error is going to be ironed out. Imagine the same thing except with 10 or 15 filters into the mix. Your problem is isolated to the LATAM region of your global report. But when you look at it from an overall perspective, the errors are within your threshold. So how do you ensure that your results are being validated at the granular level? Well, by parameterizing the reports itself. So this is where parameterization makes its grand entry within our application. So here within my system, I can, so here this is a data flow parameter. And for the sake of simplicity, I'm going with just one use case. So here I have one parameter. I can define what different values will be for these. And I can define that, hey, in this particular use case, I can just choose that, just make this as a parameter here. So I'll just define is equal to for now. There's a full-fledged system in our release which can do that. And so here I can just define is and just my parameter. Because I can define this within my system, but then I also have to ensure that I'm defining this within my SQL. And so when I'm going to my SQL, all I have to do is add a basic where condition by gender is equal to, and just apply the parameter from right here. So now when I'm running this particular flow, it's going to ensure that the measure we generate from our proof source of truth, which is the data set, and the measure we generate from our Power BI report are valid. But let's not stop here. Let's go one step further. You have 20 filters. You're not going to individually define what the filter is going to be, and you're not going to go to this entire system. You are going to have a configuration file, or you're going to have a set of parameters that you think, hey, these are the set of parameters across which I want to run. And the application can handle that as well. I'll quickly jump into a particular to showcase one of these examples here. And this is how the configuration file looks like for a very simple use case. Here, the validation use case is that I want to validate my report on H1, H2, and H1, or H1, H2 of this year, the next year, and so on and so forth. So I've defined my parameters as the following. And where the application really takes off is that the application has something called an iterative node. So here I'll use Tableau for just the sake of example here. And here I just define what the test case I want to run with. And what are the parameters? Where are they coming from? Are they a static file or are they dynamic? Of course, we choose dynamic here. And as you see, the range, order range and order range start and end are both parameterized. If I go into the run history of this particular run, you'll see that while it shows that it's just one node, this particular node has been run for multiple parameters once. So now you're ensuring that your report is being validated not just at an overall level or just for one specific level that you have meticulously chosen. You can make this run for every permutation and combination of reports that you want to run. In the upcoming release, we plan to integrate the fact that we get access to the number of slicers and the parameters and other aspects to create this configuration file for you. That's in the roadmap for us. So now you can rest assured the application, whatever configuration it creates, it's going to be iterative in nature. And so your reports are going to be very nicely validated at a granular level as well. So all this talk about validation, I do want to make sure that we don't miss out on very few key aspects here. That, hey, we can send notifications out, but what if I want to see the report in here? This should definitely create a report by default, right? So as you see, we have a few sets of runs that we see on how many runs have failed. Naturally, since I'm showcasing a demo, most of them will be failing because we want to showcase that. But every run that we create and define has a report that's generated automatically. So each time you run it, there's a report that's generated automatically, and I can just showcase this one. And in this report, you'll notice that, okay, I have my Power BI, I have my measure, and I have the compare of visualizations, but there's no data here. And that's by default. We understand that many times your BI reports or data sets are sensitive. You don't want them to be in an exportable PDF version. If you want to get into a bit of detail, we do have an entire customizable reporting system that's built by default. So this is one of the similar use cases that we saw here, except here we were validating a tooltip within our Power BI. Yes, the application can do that as well. But since because we are limited by time, we can't get into too many details. And here, just to illustrate what this particular use case was, well, this was what my Power BI report looked like, much more complex than our usual use cases. If needed, towards the end, I'll showcase this example as well. And the tooltip is this particular box chart that we were working with. As you see, it had a lot more details, especially for specific sets of base rates and other aspects. And so I pick up this particular data set, pick up the same from my measure as well. So my measure is, again, this is something that was calculated within our system using our basic SQL. And this SQL was created using Query Builder as well. And once again, the output of our results. Well, we see there's a much higher mismatch. There's definitely a bit of a problem in this use case. Not too much mismatch as well. We have a good amount of matched records and we have a good amount of mismatched records. And of course, there were a few records which were present only in one data set and not the other. So all the things that we have got. Now, this report, if you don't like the look and feel of it, you can customize this as well to an nth degree. And you can summarize all of your reports in a specific system as well. There's a great amount of user open-endedness that we bring into this system. We know that you know your reports base, you know your business use case best. We just want to make sure that the report and the application is very easy to use and you can do exactly what you want to do here. So now that I showcase this particular report, I want to quickly cover up the other two facets of the best practices that we have covered. This one is with regards to row-level security as well, and this is where our security model comes into picture. Let's take a step back and showcase sources here, just to illustrate the different kind of connections that we have. So, as you must have noticed from our connectors, we support everything ranging from a JDBC connection to flat files, generic APIs as well. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. If there's some data set that is not defined right there, you can define a generic connection for it as well. We also have a connections to flat files and complex files as well, based on any specific location. So if you have a CSV file placed on an ADLS location, you're good to go. All you have to do is define the credentials. While the application has a password vault, internal password vault, you can connect your own credential management service as well. And now this is a time I would like to clarify something very important about the application. And the main reason we've been holding back is because this is more from an architectural perspective. But a key factor about the application is that it can be installed directly onto you or your client's infrastructure. We understand that we are talking about moving data, we're talking about moving reports and other aspects, and these reports should never leave a corresponding safe space. So they can be installed, the application can be installed directly onto our clients or your client's infrastructure, or your infrastructure for that matter, irrespective of what system they use, an on-prem system, an Azure cloud system, an AWS system, or a Google cloud system. The application is agnostic. The application can be installed directly onto the infrastructure itself. And we also have a good amount of ISO certifications. And we, as a proud moment, we are used by the FedRAMP services as well for specific use cases. So yeah, we are actually pretty secure, and we do get a lot of security updates as the application moves forward. But for going back to our connections, well, you can define a basic connection at any point in this case. And of course, Power BI connection here is divided into two specific parts. One is a typical master user, what I said. So here, if I am using my credentials, then the application will be using my credentials as well. So if I don't have access to the LATAM reports and data sets, the application will not have access to it. What most of our clients actually opt for is a service principal. Now, this is a super admin within your Power BI tools. And what you can do here is define user groups. So LATAM could be my user group 1, and then say US could be my user group 2, Europe could be my user group 3. And now when I'm going to run a particular test case, I can impersonate specific user groups and define, hey, these are a set of roles. Now, when you're impersonating when you're accessing a particular report, run them through this particular user group or object ID. And so the LATAM user group, or how the report will look like LATAM user group, is the report accurate for them, and so on and so forth. So you can validate that at a good level. And of course, you can also validate, hey, if I'm running this report using the LATAM user group, am I actually seeing only LATAM datasets? So that was the row-level security test that we have here. It's a very basic example. We'll stick to the basics for now because the application can get very complicated very soon. But here we see that, yes, our Power BI report, in this case, we were working with a very specific user group of Purnita and Sastry here. And our row-level security group rule was that, hey, I want to ensure that my country region is within a particular market domain. And the market domain here, we see that this rule has failed. That's because France is present within the system when I'm only expecting Australia, United States, and Italy. So in this particular way, we actually perform some row-level security. And more on this particular set of rules, because yes, we can perform this rules on data sets, but this need not be just specific to a specific set of rules. So here in this example, I once again go to my customer report here, this particular customer report, this complicated report. And in here, I have a bunch of validations that I want to do. And here we are coming into the functional and production reporting monitoring part of the best practices. Where, okay, I have this particular report in my production. I want to ensure multiple things. I want to ensure this data is within range. I want to ensure that there are no duplicates. I want to ensure there are no nulls. I want to ensure that this list of regions I see, they are coming from a very specific set of lists that I have. I want to ensure all these things. So I just pick up these visuals and slicers. Yes, the application can pick up slicers and cards and other aspects as well. So here we pick all these particular data sets up, and here we apply data rules. So data rules is a particularly powerful tool because it does not require any kind of code knowledge. All you have to do is define exactly what type of test you want to work with, and you're good to go. Something as simple as a duplicacy check is as easy as defining, well, this is the column I want to run a duplicacy check on. And the only time I'm okay with my success criteria if there are 0 duplicates. That's it, I'm done. And the same thing follows true for other use cases as well, because you can use this not just for simple data and metadata contextual checks. You can also use them for business level checks. So here I'm ensuring that the region name is within a particular list of domains. This is similar to what we saw earlier. And here we can see that yes, everything is passing with flying colors, because the region that I was expecting was Australia, Canada, France, Germany, and so on. You see in the back end, it's all code, but for the end user, you don't have to actually know this code to actually run this. And so the application does takes care of that. Similarly, for the other chart, we perform another set of rules as well. Here we perform a null check, we perform some range checks, we also perform some duplicacy checks. And here is the first example of a business rule. Very simple example, but as we said, we're going to start with simple examples here. And here we see that, yes, I want to ensure my SIC hours between 10 and 1000 because that's what I expect. That's a realistic system. And hey, this thing has failed. The application has found a particular record for production department with SIC hours about 8K, which is much larger than my expected rule. And of course, I can download these reports, I can send them as notifications, and a lot more things as well. So many things that we can cover after this. The main aspect here is that these set of rules that you see with regards to null checks and other aspects, you can implement them all at once as well. Every rule and every data flow that you see is exportable, and the application does have inherent wizards, which basically automate the creation of these particular validation rules across thousands of tables at once. So if you want to validate multiple tables, multiple rules, you want to apply this sort of validation of duplicacy, null checks, and this combination of rules to say multiple measures all at once, you can just import them directly within the application and you're good to go. Simple as that. All right. The final thing that I want to end on is, of course, a bit of observability within my application. We have covered so many objects right now, but for this, I'll quickly turn over to Tableau just to give it a shout out as well that we support Tableau inherently. But most importantly, what do we talk about when we talk about observability? Well, in this case, we have a specific report. Again, this works for Power BI, this works for Excel files, this works for JDBC connections, anything that you can define. I'm just using Tableau to elaborate on the fact that all the things can work in hand with each other as well. So here we have a report with a bar graph and a very irregular line graph for order quantities and other aspects. So at the start, I want to ensure that, hey, you're keeping track of your system through and through. So here we introduce the profiling. So we pick up one of those graphs and we put a profile against them. As you see, it keeps track of everything: volume, nulls, patterns, frequencies, mean, sum, consistencies, and a lot more. And it keeps track of this. So you define it just once, and the application can run it every day. We have a scheduler that's built into the application as well. And here we see that, yes, there was an anomaly found in the application. Well, the anomaly is on sales. Well, why is sales? What's the exact problem? We see mean is something that's being highlighted. And if I open the trend chart, we see that based on the previous runs for this particular report, the mean of, in this case, sales has drastically shot up. So we can say that, yes, something has gone terribly wrong. In the same veins, you can do the same for volume, for null checks. Your expected range are being set over the course of multiple runs, and then you can capture anomalies right out of the gate without even defining something. This is just as easy as adding one node, just as simple as 4 clicks. That's how long it takes. And of course, you also keep track of patterns and other aspects as well. Patterns is where you can keep track of the alphanumeric pattern that you expect within your system. Very helpful if you're working with the reports and you were expecting a set number of patterns and character lengths. Also helpful for licensing and other characters where you have license plates and other characters where you have a set pattern expected. And of course, frequency for distribution. So within your particular charts, if you see a very specific type of distribution, here we see 33.3 was constant. But if there was a high shift in your distribution of your reports, the application can catch that. And so we thought to ourselves, hey, why stop here? We do have machine learning code in the application. Let's give our end users the full power to automate this. So here, let me go back to the report just to show what we're doing here. This particular irregular line graph is actually the number of orders that you see on different ship modes. Naturally, there's a good amount of seasonality into the mix, a good amount of time of day and other parameters and factors that affect it. So how do you ensure that you're actually capturing anomalies within your report in this particular manner as well? Well, that's where we give you the complete access in our observability node. You get full access to exactly what type of categorization you want to run this. So here, ship mode is my key parameter across, because the way orders are going to be generated for your air travel ship mode versus the way orders are going to be generated for people okay with that order being arrived using land and other aspects. This is going to be widely different. So you define that kind of categorization right up. You define what type of measure you want to work with, sum and mean. In this case, that's what I've done with. And if there's a cadence, and of course, if you want to leave some data sets out as well. Then you're given a list of prediction methods that you would like to work with. In this case, you have time series, IQR, multiple, and you can, of course, add your own as well. And if you're working with incremental runs, you can use that. And in the results, we see, hey, this thing has failed. Why has this failed? It has failed for one very specific date. and it is failed for only regular air, not for delivery truck. So if I open this particular graph, you'll see that it's the exact same line graph we were seeing, except the application has kept track of the orders that it has noticed in the past. And in this case, as you see that the upper and lower bounds, the teal or the bluish green color that you see has been shrinking because the application is understanding the seasonality of the data sets and other parameters. And so when there's a particular system that's way out of the league or way before the league, before or after, it's been captured as well. So that's observability. And with that, I would like to take a pause, and we'll start some questions in 5 minutes. But I do want to start up and end on a few specific notes. The application has a lot of capabilities that we have not discussed. These are primarily with regards to iteration. This is primarily with regards to integrations and a lot more. So you will see that I've already opened a few tabs present here. So this is one of my systems where I wanted to see, I wanted to illustrate our GitHub actions. This is one of the use cases. Our application is very CI/CD friendly. So here, the run code here, this is all you need to actually define your system. And one of our clients actually uses this as well. They use GitHub for their Git repository management. And anytime they push a build to production, they want to ensure that the DQM pipeline runs instantly. And GitHub Actions is how we do it. We have a complete system dedicated to Azure integrations as well, ranging from the pipelines to test plans as well, where our test plans can be mapped against the Azure test plans as well. And this is something that's not isolated just with Azure. We have the same for AWS and other systems as well. This is the example that we are showcasing. Everything has inherent report creation and inherent connectivity as well. And the application does have a scheduler built in if you would like to run with this as well. So we've covered a lot of ground, and I would like to thank all of you for staying so long to cover the different facets. Obviously, we could not get into some specific use cases. We do have discovery calls where we just discuss the exact use case that we want with our demo or clients, and then we demo that specific use case itself. That's something we have a discovery call for. But in this case, we have tried to be very generic. So with that, I would like to open the floor for questions. I really haven't taken the time into consideration, but are there any questions, Surya? I do believe there
Thank you, Shubhanshu. Thank you so much. Yeah, we had one question coming up on the hosting part, which Dave answered. Yeah, it's always it can be from any cloud provider, which can be running on the back of their firewalls or on-prem. Basically, one question definitely. We are talking about the Power BI, and I also saw that we also support Tableau. Any other BI tools that we also work with or support with?
Well, Power BI and Tableau are the tools that we primarily support, given that those are the primary aspects of us. But there's a version of this particular product which is isolated on just BI validation. It's a version that is installed directly onto your Windows system. That tool has a lot more BI capabilities like OBI and I believe Sophnos and other objects as well. But yeah, if you want to, you can reach out to us for specifics as well, because we can provide connectivity to specific BI tools if needed. But yeah, Power BI and Tableau are our focus group for now.
Great, thanks. So Dave, anything that you want to specifically communicate with our audience?
No, well, first of all, appreciate everybody attending. Hopefully you got some things out of this. Again, we focus on that end-to-end validation. I think we're sort of unique in that particular area. We're happy to have a discovery call, happy to understand your requirements a little bit more, do demonstrations that are geared towards your requirements. A lot of times people ask us for the opportunity to use the technology either in our sandbox or installed in their environment. We support you every step of the way in doing that. I think you'll find that we're very collaborative as well, and creative in terms of how we can approach and solve problems. So if you would like to see a custom demo, would like to see or like to be able to use the technology, reach out to us, and we're more than happy to work with you, understand the requirements, and help you along the way. Again, we appreciate everything. Appreciate everybody attending, and Surya and Shubhanshu, thank you as well. And with that, I think we're about out of time. Surya, you want to close this out?
Yes, Dave. Thank you, Dave. Thank you, Shubhanshu, and thank you everyone for attending this webinar today. Have a good day. Bye.
Bye-bye.